Hello everyone, Father Lamb here. It is Wednesday, July 20th. I just want to take a little excerpt from today's gospel, the gospel for the day, from Matthew's gospel, and Jesus is talking about the parable of the sower of the seed. And he spoke to them at length in parables, saying, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seed fell on the path, and birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky ground where it had little soil. It sprang up at once because the soil was not deep, and when the sun rose, it was scorched, and it withered for lack of roots. Some seed fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it. But some seed fell on rich soil and produced fruit, 100 or 60 or 30-fold. Whoever has ears ought to hear. The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. So we're called to be the rich soil, to be open to God, to be open to his will. If we had to sum up the life of Christ in one line, it would be Jesus came to do the will of his Father. In fact, he said those exact words in the scriptures. He came to do the will of the Father. And of course, the Father's will was that he would suffer and die out of love for us, rise from the dead, and welcome us all into heaven. It's a profound thing. So when we think about doing the will of God, and you and I are called to do the will of God, in one sense it's incredibly profound, but in another sense it's kind of simple. And what I mean by that is it's profound when you think about the fact that God has called me to be a priest, or called a religious person to be a sister, or someone who's married to be called to the married life, or someone called to the single life, but a deep relationship with Christ. It's incredibly profound to have a deep relationship with Christ where he wants to have a friendship with us, and he's basically leading us all right into heaven. That's incredibly profound. At the same time, we need to keep it simple. And what I mean by that, I think I learned that from people I know who are in recovery. And I think of a friend of mine who's been sober from alcohol for years and years and years. And when I talk to him about the will of God, I just really enjoy it because he keeps it so simple. He says to me, the will of God for me, he says, is not to drink. And he says not to drink for the rest of my life, but to do it one day at a time. And that's pretty simple, and it certainly makes a whole lot of sense. If you're an addict, yes, you're called by God. His will is not to use your drug, not to drink. And then he said, once he got into the program and started, as he said, working the steps and getting better, he said they would tell him that God's will is to do the next right thing. And you can't get any more simple than that. And he says sometimes God's will, the next right thing, is to get up and go to work. It might be doing the dishes, taking the trash out, being kind to your children, helping out your grandmother. I mean, it can be any number of things, but it's pretty simple. And I love the simplicity of recovery. Because you think about it, a lot of times we like to, complicate this whole thing. Like if I'm going to do God's will, I want everybody to know it. Wow, Father Lamb's going to do God's will. And you want lightning going off and maybe some background music. Ta-da, we're doing God's will today, And then God's like, take out the garbage, get over yourself. That's my will for you today. And that's so simple, but it brings us to a deeper humility. Because most of the time, God's will for us is something that's very humbling, something we may not want to do. And it's usually very simple. I know I quote this all the time, but it really has had an impact on my life. It's St. Teresa Little Flower, where she says, God does not look so much at the magnitude of anything that we do as at the love with which we do it. And so it's a matter of doing these little things with love that really is what God is calling us to. It's simple. And in its own way, it's actually very profound. Maybe this week we can just challenge ourselves to be the rich soil. And if you want to be the rich soil where the seed will grow, the rich soil is usually very well fertilized. And fertilizer has a stench to it. So sometimes it's like the stuff of our life, call it the crap of our life, that's the fertilizer that actually helps us to grow. When you find yourself having to do something, you think, geez, this is the will of God, and it really stinks. Then maybe that really is God's will, because it might be something in the end that's very fruitful. Maybe this week we might be open to doing things that we really don't want to do. Change it up a little bit. Do things that you don't really want to do, but do it out of love for God. And then we end up doing God's will. We're enriching our own soil and we're growing in his graces. So keep it simple. Do the next right thing. It's simple, It's God's will. God bless you.